I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. We are at 1.02 approval of agenda. I move the board adopt the agenda as presented. Is there a second?
Second, AJ Byrd.
All right. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing and hearing nothing, vote please. Ready for a vote?
So, okay. AJ,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Angie,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Kim Marie,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
motion carries.
All right, we've got minutes from April 21, 2020 to approve. Do we have a motion? I move the board adopt the meeting minutes of April 21st, 2020.
Second.
Discussion on the minutes. Vote please.
AJ,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Angie,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Kim Marie,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
motion carries.
All right, we'll get into the study session then, and first up are the cabinet reports. Dr. Tucker?
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thanks to a few others that have joined us this morning. From Academic Services, Christopher Hand, and then Kathy Ellermeyer with Health Services. We're going to hear from them here in a little bit. What we thought we would do at the onset of this morning's study session was just have a quick update from our cabinet members as far as kind of things that they're working on, kind of working through as we look to try to wrap up the school year, plan for the summer, but then also anticipate what next year could look like. So we're going to start off this morning with Mr. Steve Anderson with an operations update.
Good morning. Just a few things that I wanted to kind of draw out for you all. Real quick update on meals served. We provided you with a weekly update on that, and I just would highlight that we're over 70,000 meals served to date. And again, want to just kind of call out that team that has just kind of worked tirelessly to kind of pull that off. So really appreciate that group. Next issue I wanted to talk a little bit about was our facility master planning process. As you all probably recall, a few months ago, we brought forward a demographer. They have just begun their work when COVID hit. And since it's hit, they've had some trouble kind of making the connections that they typically need to make to really complete their work and to drive their work. So that's going to take a little bit longer. I have a conference call with him today to kind of flesh through all the details and dates and so forth of what his next few months look like. But related to that, we had put out an RFP and have a good handful of proposals from architects in and around the Kansas City area who have applied to kind of take that role for the district. We're going to pause that for right now. And we've communicated that to those firms that we're just going to hold tight until we have a little bit of a clearer picture on the demographer's work. So all that said, we had been targeting the potential of an April 21 date for the next bond issue if projects surfaced. And so with these delays, we're going to have to push that past that date. You know, more conversations to come. But just wanted you all to be aware that that was going to be a little bit of a slow go for a while. And then the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was just construction. I think we had provided an update to you all a while back on the two remaining major projects as part of the bond work, the 800s renovation in Lbarty High School. Basically what the space at Fine Arts will be vacating as they move into the new Performing Arts Center. And then also some roof work in and above the atrium and in and above the media center. And so those last two projects, as I mentioned, were part of that $49 million bond. Part of the library project roof work there is going to be paid out of capital dollars. But we did decide to move forward with those projects after going through the PAC schedule. We realized that we have a pretty good confidence that all that work will be tidied up in time for us to make that move. And so they will begin demo here soon within Lbarty High School in readying that space for its renovation. Again, as has been mentioned, those projects, remaining projects at Lbarty High School, will spill into the school year. We've been very actively involved in conversations with leaders at that building and safety, security, and other folks on the facilities and operations side, just to make sure we have safe access and entry and are adhering to all appropriate building and fire codes. And so it's a little complicated. It'll be a little messy, but I think when we're done, which would probably be in mid-fall, late fall, it will certainly be worth the effort and headache. So, and the last thing really was reentry planning, but we'll be talking about that a little bit later in the agenda. That's all I had. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Steve, what's the 800 area going to be ultimately developed for?
Right. I'll speak briefly to it, and then maybe Dr. Moore, Dr. Tucker might jump in with more specifics, but it's really going to be renovated and opened up similar to what we did up at North in the new wing there when you first come in to that space, and allow for a lot of flexibility in different functions for the district to take place academically, but then also to be open potentially for after hours connection points with the business community. I don't know, Dr. Moore, do you have anything maybe to add to that?
We're also looking to add a global micro school, not this year, but the following year. So that space would house that so that students would have the flexibility to move around and learn from different teachers. And as Mr. Anderson said, from different, having businesses come in and work with them. So that will house that as well.
Thanks for the update.
Just to follow up on the 800s wing, I know we've got, folks in there needing to pack up and move and do some different things of that nature. What's kind of the communication been around, obviously keeping distance and all that stuff as folks go in there and we get movers in there?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've been working through Aaron Money and his team in making sure that, all that proper messaging is taking place with, how that space is packed down, how we kind of coordinate that, make sure it's not everybody in at one time. And then they're actually doing a lot of labeling and kind of segregating out of different stuff that's in there. There's a lot of stuff in that wing. And then our teams on the operations side, again, practicing safe distancing and all the proper, using the proper PPE, are going in and starting to pull that out and then take it where it needs to be taken. So we've had a couple good conversations and meetings in around how to pull that off.
Great. And then Steve, just a separate topic. I know a couple meetings ago we talked about meal availability and just simply, food being more scarce as we move further into the year. Are we still seeing that as an issue for providing meals for students, or has that kind of?
The last update I received from Nutrition Services was last week, and they're still feeling pretty confident that we're in good shape moving into June. So it's always one of those things, they're a couple weeks ahead, and there's nothing right now in that next couple weeks that is of concern. And so I think we still kind of have that green light to keep moving forward at this time.
Perfect, thanks.
The other thing I would add to that, Nick, is in conversations with Pleasant Valley Baptist Church and Harvesters and Feed Northland Kids, that original plan was slated to go through May 10th. They're looking at pushing it through the end of the school year, a few days later, but then also exploring how to be able to continue that program as well into the month of June. So there's those two pieces as a reminder to everybody. There's the school side of breakfast and lunch distribution, and then those food kits that will likely continue into the summer. So as those plans are finalized, we'll communicate that out to the board. Other questions of Steve before we move on from operations? Okay, next up, Cindy Sullivant on the finance side. I know we'll hear from you in just a little bit on the budget outlook, but anything else to provide an update on?
Yes, I would like to just tell everybody that last week we submitted our formal FEMA application for public assistance, which entails just the ability to then create a project to request public assistance if we should decide to do that. A couple of weeks ago, we had entered the portal, got our information into it, and then were able last week to complete the formal application. Andy did look at that because he had to sign it as well as myself. He had to sign it just being the elected president of your board, so he has seen that application. It doesn't mean we have to go ahead and request public assistance. It just gives us the ability if we decide to take advantage of that opportunity somewhere down the road. The next step would be to go ahead then and write up a project and attach costs and submit that then to see if we could receive any public assistance. So we'll keep up to date on that and figure out if we do indeed want to do that. There is a lot of paperwork attached to it, a lot of documentation attached to it. I'm sure we have all of that, but it does come under some scrutiny and is quite a bit of work. So we'll follow up on that with you as we go forward deciding to do that. But it is available should we decide to. Other than that, we've just been continuing to work on the budget, which we'll talk about in a little bit, as Dr. Tucker said, and keeping up with reading and following up what's going on at the state, and just in general trying to keep up with what's changing and how things are changing. And that's all I have in the way of an update, unless you have any questions for me.
Any questions of Cindy? The one thing I would add in addition to that FEMA application, mainly since you might have seen some headlines here of late with Clay County, there's also another avenue to be able to potentially access some federal dollars that we were exploring with Clay County. And so with that said, working closely with the City of Lbarty, I believe there's a total of about $29 million that could get designated to Clay County that then could be dispersed to municipalities as well as other taxing jurisdictions. The figure that we've seen is about 1.2, just under 1.2, it's close to $1.8 million, I believe, as far as funds that could get distributed to school districts. I think there's a little bit of red tape tied to that if you're following the news, but we'll keep you informed as to whether or not those funds get passed through to the school district. I think one of the questions that was raised by a few of the commissioners was in and around accountability and ensuring that those funds are appropriately not just dispersed, but how we can, as a county, keep record or keep accounting of those funds as they're dispersed and the expenditures that they're used for. So we'll continue to watch that. I appreciate Cindy for engaging with the City of Lbarty as well as the county on that particular item. So moving on then from finance, Dr. Vogelaar, Human Resources.
Hey, Dr. Tucker, before we go, can I ask
Yes,
a quick question? I know the county had set up meetings with some of the city officials before they had approved the disbursement of that money last week. Do you know, was it the district, or do you know if any of the districts were ever invited to those meetings? They were holding them at like 4 o'clock every afternoon for a while.
The outreach that we received was directly from the City of Lbarty and their city staff. So we worked directly with them, Dan Estes, in terms of interacting on whether or not we would be interested in pursuing those dollars. And then also some legwork that we did as far as diving into the parameters to make sure that we understood what would qualify. Anything else to add to that, Cindy?
No, you're exactly right. The county never did touch base with us. We dealt strictly through Dan and the city, and that was because the city thought that they may have extra dollars to pass through as well. So that's why they reached out to us. We didn't even realize we were in line for the county money until we saw the resolution last week.
Yeah. That answers your question? Okay.
Yep, it does. Thanks.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay, then next up, Dr. Vogelaar.
Thank you very much. We are probably front burner wise as an HR department working to fill a couple pretty big positions, Liberty Oaks principal and the school age care manager. Those panel interviews occurred over the last couple weeks, kind of culminating in some final round interviews late last week. Many people who are in this meeting this morning sat on those panels providing feedback on selection decisions that we have to make there. So that's probably the big front burner issue. Staffing decisions on the whole continue to happen, especially with regard to vacancies that emerge. They do trickle in. Contracts, as you know, went out at the end of March, concluded the first part of April, and it's usually in that window that we start seeing some resignations, and those staffing positions continue to be processed accordingly. Student teacher placements are also in full swing. It's very strange to think about student teacher placements given kind of the situation we're in, but those happen, every year, pulling together cooperating teachers who will take on additional college students in the fall semester. We've got probably about 40 kids that we'll be placing. These are college seniors who are getting ready to start their careers in education, and they want to do their student teaching here with Lbarty. So that's very exciting for us. Last week, we also met with Holmes Murphy to get kind of an early look at where our health insurance renewal might be landing. Cindy was in on that conference call as well. Things are looking good at this point. Hospital urgent care doctor visit usage is way down with the coronavirus, and so our claims experience numbers are reflecting that. Where the renewal will land, obviously we don't know until we get that trailing 12 months from the August data set, but right now it's trending favorably for the district. More to come on that. We're also taking a look through Holmes Murphy at some different analytics and analytic tools that they have that might allow us to see exactly what levers are available to pull with regard to some at-risk or high-risk health potential issues, and how to head those off through our wellness programming as well. So we're engaged in that work also. Obviously, the compensation recommendation that you received in March continues to be outstanding. So readying the team for a quick turnaround on contract amendments when that happens. We send out our extra duty assignment letters as well with those contract amendments. And so if that happens in May, we want to get ready to turn that around very quickly with the end of the school year being the 22nd. Because all of that is automated now electronically, it really is not the end of the world if those go out in the summer months or during summer school. We just have some communication glitches with certain segments of our population that don't have ready access or don't utilize ready access to their email over the summer months. But we're developing a plan to get that turned around as quickly as possible as we move forward there. Reentry plan was mentioned. Steve talked about that, and we've got representation on that team as we look at what reentry will look like. And part of that reentry plan from an HR perspective is going to be processing or dealing with leave or absence requests that emerge when we start calling people back to work. We anticipate that. All of the industry experts are indicating that that's happening in private sector as people are reentering now. Will likely happen as well for the public sector, and so we're anticipating that, making sure we process those in compliance with the laws that cover those unique protection, the CARES Act and the Family First Coronavirus Response Act has some pretty specific provisions in there on how you handle or process those leaves and whether or not they qualify for paid status. So we're readying the team to react to that when the reentry plan rolls out. That's a highlight of some of the things that the HR department is working on right now, and I'll take any questions if you have them.
Bob, you highlighted something that maybe you can either shed light on, or Steve or Cindy as well. I mean, utilization rates across insurance, whether that's vehicle, health, otherwise, significantly lower. I know a lot of companies are being forced by commissions to give dollars back because the profitability is too high based on the regulations set at the state level. Have we heard anything about, rebates coming back from our insurers in any way, shape, or form?
Nothing, at least on the health insurance side. I don't know if on property casualty or work comp or anything like that, there is. I know we've got quite a fleet of automobiles that are insured as well. Steve might have an answer to that part.
No, I've not heard anything from them. Of course, we've just renewed. But I can certainly look into that a little bit. Usually what happens is, good performance then shows up that next year. But I can peek into that because I've seen that as well, kind of across the broader market.
Yeah.
I did
Cool.
email with Andrew Jansen last week regarding the property and casualty insurance based on something we've been hearing about it just skyrocketing all over in general, property and casualty wise. And we'd heard that in our renewal meeting that the rates overall would be going up. And I think that's going to continue on the property and casualty side based on the feedback I got from Lockton. So I wouldn't anticipate any rebates on that side.
Our insurance renewals are based in large part on a trailing 12-month claim experience. So that's where we would realize the savings there rather than in the form of rebates on the medical, dental, and vision side.
Gotcha.
We can follow up with that further if we learn anything different on the insurance side. So great question. Other questions of Dr. Vogelaar?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bob. We have our executive directors on from academic services. They're all three participating this morning, and I think they have selected Dr. Julie Moore to provide a quick update from their departments.
Good morning, everyone. From academic services, we started Thrive on 5 last week, and we feel like that went really well. We got to see some products on Twitter and Facebook, and we actually had some teachers who and students who emailed us to show us some of the work that they've been doing. So we're excited to see what week 2 brings with that. We are into a few weeks now of the hold harmless grading, and we feel like that has been very beneficial. We've received just a few questions here and there, and we're trying to ensure that students remain engaged with their schoolwork over the next few weeks and they end the year strong. We did put together an FAQ on grading just for those questions that do come in occasionally, and that is on the district website. We are continuing to work on senior dates for this summer, particularly graduation and baccalaureate. Right now, it looks like the end of July will probably be the best date, July 19th for graduation. We have June 14th reserved still, but not sure that that's reasonable. If July 19th does not work for that large gathering, we have discussed a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. So we feel good about having something prepared for the seniors on that. With regard to assessment, we did
Julie,
yes.
Before you continue, can I ask a question? Graduation, I know North Kansas City, they have 4 high schools. I think they're going to virtual graduations in all 4. Do we know what other districts are doing, or do you have a sense of where we fit with other districts and how we're doing it?
Yes, Dr. Tucker and I have been watching other districts and have been talking as they kind of come out with their plans. And so they're really all over the place. I have a group of executive directors and assistant superintendents, and we from all over the state, and we've kind of created a little cohort of our own. And so every time something comes up, we share if something changes. So from Springfield to, the St. Louis area to Park Hill, it's what are you guys doing for this? What are you doing for that? And everybody's all over the place. There are some districts who are set on, we are going to have a face-to-face graduation. And there are others who have just decided to do the virtual and hope that, with North Kansas City doing the virtual and then hoping that they can maybe do something face-to-face later on. We feel like there's a lot of different activities in the works right now for seniors. And so my goal has always been that they walk across a stage, whether that be, at Silverstein or something at the school. And then if that can't happen, then we'll have a virtual graduation, but we would like that to kind of be plan D. But again, there are some districts that have just kind of said, nope, we're doing it this way. And others who are holding out. I know Springfield is going to have graduation in early August. And then there are some others there's one district who said, our graduates and parents want to wait, even if it means them coming back from college in December and walking then they're going to wait until then to do it. So.
Yeah. And I know we're getting into dates too. I just adopted on one of those adoption pages on Facebook,
Yeah.
and the kid's leaving for boot camp in mid-July. So I know we've got kids that are also leaving at some point.
Yeah, we have some that are going to boot camp in June, and they have said, "Are we going to have something?" And they were actually more concerned about getting their diplomas. So we said, "We'll make sure you have your diploma before you leave for that."
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
The only other thing I would add, Scott, would be that there are fewer districts moving toward virtual than are wanting to stay committed to face-to-face.
Yeah, and I think that's probably can be a function of, how many high schools. I know North Kansas City, they get 4 high schools, and they may it may be easier with 4 high schools just to say there's just no way.
Right.
But when you've got 2 or 1, it's probably a little easier.
And really the driving factor there with North Kansas City, we've had multiple conversations with them, is really trying to anticipate gathering sizes at the end of June, end of July, even by August. How quickly do you get back to a 3,000 person event? Probably not very quickly, but could you divide that out and have multiple graduations for the same high school? So that's really why North Kansas City made that decision. The other thing that they did as they made that announcement, they did get feedback from students and parents. And so they came back in and said, we will also have some type of a senior gathering, be it a barbecue or tailgate or something to that effect, just to celebrate seniors whenever the all clear is given. So great question. We'll continue to monitor that. Of course, aren't going to make decisions outside of health department guidance and CDC guidance. So it's just a matter of communicating along the way to those seniors and their parents. So
thank you.
What else, Dr. Moore?
A few more things from the assessment department. We were supposed to give the ACT on March 24th to all juniors, and that obviously didn't happen. So we did provide them with a voucher so that they could take the ACT either in July or this fall. And so we've already had several families reach out in order to take the test. And then with iReady, we are giving families the option to do a final diagnostic that's in the elementary level, so that if they want to see where their students land, we usually are able to do that at school, but we will give parents the option to give their students that diagnostic at the end of the year to see how their students ended the year. End of year closeout procedures. We have a team of elementary and secondary principals, along with some directors who have been working on closeout procedures so that we can get teachers back into the building to clean up their classrooms, and then get students and parents in to get stuff. So for elementary, we will have the option for them to drive up, and they don't have to get out of their car. At the middle and high school, it's a little bit more complicated. So they will get out of their car with one parent if need be, and get stuff out of their hallway locker, out of their PE locker, get their yearbook. For seniors, get their caps and gowns. And so we have that process ready to go. Thank you to Kathy Ellermeyer and Gary Majors, who looked at it again late last night for me so that we could send it out today to the principals. So we think that that's about ready to go, and we have it so that we can be safe with that process. And then finally, we just have to say that this is Teacher Appreciation Week. So we want to make sure and recognize all of the teachers in our district who are working so hard to make learning continue for the students of LPS. We definitely couldn't do our job without them and the hard work that they put forth every day. And that is our report.
Other questions of academic services before we move on?
I just have a quick question, Julie, on the hold harmless grading. I know that it was a little bit tricky with Power School, and there was some maneuvering that needed to be done so that could be reflected appropriately for students. Is there any kind of plan for when that will happen so all students can see, especially at secondary, can see what those grades were on March 22nd?
Yeah, so Kelly Soluri put together something so that the teachers could go in and put that in like as a grade. So if teachers haven't done that, we need to go back and review that process with them and make sure that they know how to do it, because he has sent them a video on how to get that into Power School as a grade so students can see it.
Okay, I would say that that's fairly inconsistent.
Okay, we will take care of that.
Hey, Julie, I know Scott rightfully, focused in on seniors and graduation. That's typically at the forefront. I've had some 5th grade parents reach out from different schools who have said, wow, didn't realize all the stuff we do on 5th graders as they say goodbye to the schools and that transition into middle level. Have you heard anything from different building principals about how they're going to manage that and how that transition into middle school is going to look different this year?
Right, as far as getting preparing them for middle school?
Yes.
Yeah, so we've been talking about that and how we can maybe offer some, usually we have those transition dates and students can come in, and we do that as part of summer school. We're hoping to talk through that with Christopher. Can that be at the end of July as opposed to it being in June this year? So we still have that opportunity for students. It might just be smaller chunks. So instead of doing a couple of hours on one day and a couple of hours another day through summer school, we could just sign students up and say, if you're A through, E, you could come on this day and we're going to teach you your locker and we're going to walk you around the building and still do some of those things. Just instead of it being in June, it would just be later. And then they're also, I know that 2 of the buildings are working on a virtual just process where students can watch it. And that won't be the only thing, but that will help ease some of the anxiety of students, because I've actually gotten some let's talk questions about when can I get into my school and learn about middle school. And so we want to make sure that they feel comfortable getting in. The other thing is we're still planning on doing the web day, which will be the day before school. So that they can get in that day and walk their schedules and learn about, and again, this is all obviously, depending on what school looks like then, but we are moving forward with planning those events and hoping that we can continue to have them.
Great.
And similarly, Nick, that 8th grade transition to 9th grade and those opportunities. And then I think you should have seen early this week, the update on kindergarten roundup and us pushing that to virtual. And it's a little bit of a loose, tight approach. There are some pieces that every campus will be doing at the elementary level. And then there are some pieces that are somewhat optional. But I believe that is slated for May 21st here in the coming weeks. So that will get pushed out to all of those incoming kindergarten families. So kind of a unique spot, but you're exactly right. Those transition points, be it kindergarten, 5th grade, or 8th grade into the coming year, are incredibly important. So we don't want to miss that opportunity, be it in a virtual environment or hopefully for the higher grades, that face-to-face option. So other questions?
Just to follow up on that too, Dr. Dixon Seahorn, you may have shed some light on this. And I probably didn't explain very well, but I think the 5th graders as they leave have historically, and I know it's a building by building decision, right? But the 5th graders typically get a nice send off. They go around, high fives, all that stuff. Clearly that's going to look very different this year. Have we heard any indication of, maybe what some of the elementary schools are going to do, or is that still a little too early to tell?
Your question is, I wanted to make sure I'm off mute. Your question is right on time. We actually have made a plan for how we're going to send off our 5th graders. We decided to go with yard sign recognition. We had one school that kind of got ahead of us over this weekend, but the plan is around the weekend of May 15th, 16th. We'll kind of coordinate that along with what Dr. Moore had mentioned about the end of year closeout process. And so every school is working on each 5th grade student having their own yard sign that will be delivered to them as part of that closeout process so that they can have it on display in their yard. So that is the way we decided at the elementary level to recognize and celebrate our 5th grade students.
Very cool.
Wow, that's amazing. That's just amazing to me that you're looking at that much detail through all this. So thank you for that. I never cease to be amazed at you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything? I think AJ's got something. Were you saying something, AJ?
who were, can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Students that kind of fall in families that fallen off the map. Is that group still exist where they aren't in contact with the schools, or has that group, has it minimized, or has it grown? Or is that a reality anymore?
Well, we have, our security team was wonderful and reached out to families that we tried to get a hold of and couldn't and were concerned about. And so that number decreased greatly, and it was small to begin with because most of our buildings had reached out. For the students who have kind of started to dwindle and not do as much homework, we've asked the teachers in the buildings, the counselors, the principals to call those students and those parents and say, hey, let's finish strong, and just make sure, is there anything you need that we can do to support you, so they continue to do their schoolwork, or if there's something else going on that we don't know about, how can we help them? So there's been good communication between the families and the schools.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
What else of academic services? Anything? Okay, thank you, Dr. Moore and Dr. Dixon-Seahorn, Dr. Westfall. Next up, just a couple quick items from my end. Again, thank you to Dallas and his team and all the committee that assisted with Teacher of the Year recognition of Summer Kelly. Next week, I thought that was fitting, or sorry, yesterday, I thought that was fitting as we enter into Teacher Appreciation Week. So we want to celebrate her and look forward to when we're back together face to face. Also appreciate the board for assisting. Angie Reed helped write a letter that will be pushed out later to teachers, and I know there was quite a bit of input from others on the board, so we feel like that's in its final version. We'll get that letter pushed out a little bit later on. The only other item that I had was just a reminder, we do have a legislative session that's taking place right now, and so they are trying to get caught up from some time in which the legislature was closed. What we are hearing right now is that there are still quite a bit of education-related bills that are in process, but that those will likely get folded into an omnibus bill, kind of the kitchen sink bill. And so what that will likely look like is some things we agree with, some things we disagree with, and really trying to push through that and wade through that. I believe that's in the Senate. It's Senate Bill 528. What we are also hearing from some of our education associations, I don't know if the School Boards Association has taken this position, but several of the education associations are collaborating to craft a letter or to craft a position to legislators in asking them to hold on any bills that are not related to budget development or responding to the pandemic. So we're watching that pretty closely. We have provided some insight or some testimony from the district on a couple of bills, even last week and this week. But we'll see if those all get folded into an omnibus bill, or really they kind of take the guidance or the direction from those education associations to really just focus on those two priorities, the budget development piece, and then response and support of school districts and the state in terms of navigating the coronavirus. So we'll continue to watch that. We'll provide additional updates, and I'm sure you'll see information coming out from MSBA as to how that omnibus bill takes shape. Those are the only couple of items that I had, unless you have questions of me before we move on into the agenda. Okay. I'll turn it over to Andy.
All right. We will go on to the spring regional meeting discussion. Hopefully everyone had a chance to watch that 15-20 minute emergency planning MSBA video. And there we have some discussion questions here in our agenda. So I guess I'll just throw out the first one, and anyone who wants to chime in with their thoughts on this as they watch that. What suggestions provided in the program regarding emergency operations planning are most relevant in our district? Anyone want to comment on that first?
I feel like a lot of the things that they talked about in that reading were things that we already have in place. And so it was difficult to find things to add to that.
Yeah, I think my general feeling from listening was that we are probably ahead of the curve, and a lot of that was maybe geared towards districts that don't have maybe some of the resources that we're fortunate enough to have in our district. Obviously, everyone can always do something different or better, but I guess it reinforced for me, that I'm comfortable and happy with where our district is and the people that we've got in place with respect to the operations and the security and the health side of it. Anyone have any comments on the strengths of our own emergency plan?
Gary Majors, just having a general person at the district level to oversee all of, what we have happening in all of our buildings, I think is a huge strength, particularly for a district this size.
If I could just pop in,
and Andy, back to your original question. I don't necessarily think of in the emergency plan of cybersecurity being a part of that, but I think that was an interesting aspect to that got me thinking a little bit differently about the preparedness plan itself.
I would also add that, one of the things it talked about was coordination with other municipalities. And I think we have done a really good job at building those relationships so that we have good partnerships with City of Lbarty and City of Kansas City where we need to be able to take care of those.
Do you have something for us, Steve?
Actually, that's what I was just going to mention. I do think that's something that's really strong about our plan and the coordination, the regular kind of connection points that we have, not only with kind of our folks here in the metro, our partners, but also more broadly, kind of beyond just kind of the Lbarty area, connecting regularly with our other security folks, partners in other districts. The other thing I think in terms of strengths, our plan is pretty fluid and adaptable in terms of how it is deployed in the event of an emergency. So it's a little bit unique that way. In fact, Gary and I just this past fall, we're talking about maybe setting up the time in the summer to kind of get a little bit more depth of our plan with the board in a study session. So that was kind of one of those things that we talked about maybe being worthwhile. Yeah, all in all, I think it's definitely a strength. I believe that it's come a long way just in a few short years. I think the program is one of our strengths.
The other thing I would say in terms of the cybersecurity piece, as Nick raised, it's been a couple of years now, but there have been a series of audits as far as school district technology audits in that very same light as far as cybersecurity precautions. And while Lbarty Public Schools hasn't been audited formally, what we've done is we've kept close with those districts that have been audited to learn best practices and what we should do and can do. So whether it's our response to an attack or whether it's some of the proactive pieces that we put in place, and we've shared some of that with you before, or flipping to online learning and shelter at home, constantly being mindful of that. Trey's here in the executive conference room with us. I know his team does a great job at being able to push information out to teachers and students as to the safety that they should be taking to ensure that we minimize whether it's a data breach or those phishing emails or any of those pieces that we see just as any other industry. So.
Did anything stand out to anyone about any areas that we might want to modify or improve?
I think point.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
I think Steve's point of being fluid is what is really important. And if we haven't had a lesson in fluidity over the last 2 months, and granted that's been some curriculum stuff, but I think we've learned that you cannot set things in stone because things do not stay static. They are constantly changing in one way or another. And by having somebody in there to kind of look at that and having multiple sets of eyes on that, it helps us stay up with, you know, what's going on and what's happening and what do we need to change and what might not be working.
Yeah, and I would just add to what you said, Steve. I would appreciate it if we put it on the calendar as an annual study session, deeper dive, just so that we can understand better what are the things that we do think are strengths, what are the things that we think we need to continue to work on, and just so the board has a fresh look at it on a really regular basis.
And then do any of you or any of us have any questions about any of the planning? We've already touched on that a little bit, and that would be a good idea. That may even be part of like a board retreat annually to dive into that part. Anyone else have questions about it?
I guess just one of my observations when we talk about it, I think what I see here is it's a framework with how do we deploy the people to go solve the problem that emerges, and that's important. Having some perspective. A lot of times we suffer from recency bias. What happened last week or last month is looming large in our minds, and we forget about the range of things that can happen. And so doing a variety of kind of tabletop scenarios that allow you to think through, oh, well, this hasn't happened for a few years, but we could have a broad scale pandemic that was either targeted or just natural events. And so even though they're less likely to happen in the immediate, having a range of thoughts about what might happen, that we should just play through. What are the scenarios and how do we use this framework? Does it cover the needs, and what other resources do we need to have somewhere to be ready to go?
Anyone else have any final thoughts on this portion?
Trying to respond.
There's AJ. Oh, AJ, you went back to mute.
Here's my question. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
How often do we do these tabletop in small groups? How often do they occur? Any idea?
Yeah, sure. We do it annually, at least once annually with anybody who's interested in participating. Usually I think they usually do it in 2 sessions, but pretty large groups of leaders, district leaders participate. And then Gary has also been really good about kind of responding to specific requests that folks might have at a building level. And he'll kind of swing in and kind of work with them directly on whatever issues that they want to kind of play out. A lot of times it's in and around intruder issues, but they've also looked at other scenarios as well.
Okay.
On that same note, though, we also do after action reports. And so as we're walking through kind of a critical issue, a little bit bigger than just a kid being suspended, but usually something that's involving multiple administrators or law enforcement or the central office, most often, Gary will then follow up with a debriefing and then a summary of what worked well, what didn't work well, lessons learned. So we utilize that as well, kind of the opposite of a tabletop activity post-event. So.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I know some of this is, hey, there's a safety and security element to it, so we don't release everything publicly for that reason. But the one thing that is never at the forefront of my mind when we think about, emergencies and things of that nature is this conversation about evacuation sites and then reunification sites. And my assumption is that for every school, it's probably unique and different, and there's great reasons for that. But that was just something that caught me as, I don't ever think about that and what that looks like long term.
And probably the most recent, as you all will remember, is our electrical issue at Franklin Elementary, where we spent the greater portion of a day housed at Pleasant Valley Baptist Church. And having not practiced some of that and talked about some of that, whether it's tabletop or capturing it in crisis plans, pretty quickly people knew what to do as they responded. It's not textbook because you're doing it a lot on the fly, but at the same time, that's probably the best example of putting those crisis plans into place while at the same time working incredibly close with emergency responders, fire department, police department, utilities, city council, you name it. It was kind of an all hands on deck on that given day. So you're exactly right in terms of those reunification plans are important to have. Hopefully you don't have to use them, but ever so often you do.
And even in that case, just to add, you know, we, gosh, it was probably about 2 years prior to that incident. We had reached out to Pleasant Valley, who had housed us before years ago, and we had some issues at, I think, Warren Hills, just to make sure that they were still kind of a willing partner. Of course, they were. We walked the space with the team, kind of identifying how we might operate in the event that we needed to kind of move a bunch of folks in, how we'd move the buses in. So we had talked all of that through within a couple of years, and so that really helped in the execution of that. The craziness of that day, that, you know, we had the guy to call. They were ready for us immediately. They brought in some of their folks to assist us. It really went quite well because we'd had those relationships and conversations with them ahead of time.
Anyone have any final thoughts or questions? And of course, this was a replacement for attending the regional meetings that did not occur because of the pandemic. And I think there's a form that we fill out and submit, and this was the last box to check so that we would be eligible for the MSBA Governance Award, right?
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Do you and Sandra have that form?
We do. We'll process that on our end.
Perfect. Thank you. Anything else on this? Hearing nothing, we will move on to 2.03, the budget outlook.
Yeah, thank you. I want to commend Cindy Sullivant and the Business Services Department, who continue, as we do each spring, to develop the budget in preparation for the next fiscal year, albeit we know that it's not been easy this go around. We generally are on track to have a preliminary budget document ready for you at the end of May, and we'll continue to do that in accordance with statute, albeit we know that there are a lot of moving pieces. So we wanted to offer up an opportunity for Cindy to just kind of relay what she's learned, where she's at. And then you'll notice that following this particular agenda item is the salary recommendations, which is really just as a placeholder, as a reminder, as we learn more about our revenue projections, the eventual decision on what those salary recommendations will look like will be brought forward, be it at our May meeting or perhaps even later in June, just depending on timing. But wanted to turn it over to Cindy to provide a brief update this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker. We're continuing to make adjustments to the proposed FY21 budget based on what we're hearing from the state and other places. But eventually we're going to have to land something so that we can bring you a draft budget at the May board meeting. So we will probably stop the pieces from moving by the end of the week for now. And then when we bring you the final budget in June, we will update it with anything we have learned between then and now. You have seen the state reports for the April revenue and how dismal it was. And then also you've heard that year to date, the state revenue is negative as compared with last year. So collections are still not going well for sales tax and property tax, or excuse me, income taxes. The true state of the state revenue won't be known probably until more in the line of July and August, when the income taxes are collected from filings and estimated payments. So right now, the news is good. When Friday they took up the budget negotiations again, they did not cut K-12 education for the foundation formula. So at this point, the budget document does reflect a full funding formula. So we will get updates on that throughout the remaining month when we bring the final budget back to you. And then I anticipate as things roll along through the summer, there could be and will be more news. So we will be constantly updating that budget. And you've heard me say it before, it's like a car. once you drive it off the lot, it's out of date and used. And as soon as I stop moving this budget, it's out of date and the information is not current. So we'll still do the best we can to provide you the most up-to-date information, as we always do. The only cut we know right now from the state is with the transportation allotment, and that was cut by $12.2 million. So we will be decreasing that funding in our revenue stream. At the current time, I'm talking operations only. It looks like we are budgeting a small increase, around $1 million in operating revenue, due primarily to increases in property taxes offset by decreases in foundation formula and title programs and other revenues that we're anticipating to decrease. We have expenditures have seemed to come down about $1.4 million, and we'll still be playing with those as people get us more information. But that's on the operating side, and that's primarily from things that were one-time expenditures last year. And I will go into more detail about those at the May regular board meeting. But we haven't made significant cuts to many places, so we do have room if we do need to cut or make changes in later months, that we have some places identified potentially that we can trim some budget off if we need to. Like I said, we will be ready in May. It has been fun and challenging with people working from home to try and get this all put together, but they're doing a fabulous job working virtually and coming in once in a while as needed to get things put together. So we're in good shape, and we'll tell you the whole story in May in a couple weeks.
Questions of Cindy?
Yeah, so Cindy, so kudos for all the effort. I know this is challenging in and of itself, and throwing this together is just, another issue with this year. So, but you mentioned $1 million on the positive side from property tax, if I heard correctly.
Right.
Is that primarily due to increased valuation, or are we talking TIF roll-offs, and so that's contributing? Both. Okay.
Yeah. And it's mainly, I still have in the budget right now a 3% increase in assessed valuation, due primarily to new construction. I have emailed and reached out to the county, and with their schedule, I'm not hearing back from them. So I truly don't have much of an idea other than historical data to go on for that increase. So that truly is a fluid number right now, that until I hear something from them, I can't tie down any better than I have now.
Other questions of Sydney? David?
Nope.
Nope. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Then move into 2.04, the salary recommendations.
As we mentioned, we brought this before you previously. We shared with you at our last meeting that we had met with Team Lbarty, as well as the Administrative Salary and Welfare Committee. And as you'll recall, our commitment at this point to be able to roll schedules horizontally and vertically. And the second piece was that was a CBIZ phase. If you'll remember, we entered into kind of a salary study with CBIZ, put that out to bid. CBIZ came back with a proposal, and we opted to go with them in terms of conducting that salary study. We're able to put phase 1 into place last year for this fiscal year, and then looking at a phase 2 element, phase 3 element, phase 4 element in terms of that complete study being fully implemented. So that's where we stand presently with the recommendation. There's also kind of a smaller amount that we had shared with you that would be utilized to shore up a couple of folks based on some movement that needed to occur. But that's where we stand presently, and continuing to watch our revenue streams to be able to identify if that recommendation remains or if we need to modify that recommendation between now and the month of June as you look at the final budget. Dr. Vogelaar, anything to share as far as updates from your end?
Yeah, I think you hit on all of those. The one thing that you may have been referring to is that small portion to hold harmless folks on the teacher salary schedule at step 25. in FY19, we put in a one-time $1,500 enhancement to those folks who've been frozen and without a place to roll. And then as the schedule enhancements, match that $1,500, there's an offsetting portion just to make sure none of those employees experience a pay cut until the salary schedules catch up with what that enhancement provided. That may have been what Dr. Tucker was referring to in terms of that small $1,800 amount.
Yeah, and the other thing to add would be, just as we mentioned with graduation and canvassing and seeing what other districts are doing, albeit each district is different, wanting to stay competitive and seeing what they're doing, particularly in this volatile period, whether they're doing anything above step and advancement or any additional monies to the base, kind of collaborating to see where everyone else is at so that we don't lose our footing as it relates to our competitiveness within our area, within our region. So again, we'll continue to watch this closely. Appreciate Dr. Vogelaar, and Human Resources, Team Lbarty, ADSOL, certainly, as well as Cindy Sullivant, Business Services team, and helping navigate all of this. So any additional questions on the salary recommendations piece or the budget outlook? Okay, thank you.
All right. I guess I'm curious what the information is that might come in over the next month that we, as you kind of scan the radar, that would influence doing something different here. And obviously unknown is unknown, but are there things that you think would confirm or cause you to reconsider?
I think just the revenue streams in terms of those projections, state revenue in particular, and what's happening with the foundation formula. So then as we think about our ability to make decisions today that then set us up for next fiscal year, let alone the next couple of fiscal years, I think that's where, as Cindy has indicated, we're already looking at budget reductions and thinking about that way. So as not to wait and see, but then putting some proactive pieces in place now. And so as we look at that salary recommendation, again, it might be the recommendation that we bring to you in June and say, yes, this is it. We feel comfortable about this, or there might be some modifications to it, but it's truly all predicated on the revenue projections piece. The second thing I would say, and this is where every district differs, as you all know, that financial, whatever you want to call it, tsunami or question mark even that's coming, every district will be responding to that differently based on where they sit, what their fund balances look like, what their local assessment looks like, how much they rely on the foundation formula. And so what we've been talking about as school districts and superintendents is, if you were here back in 08, 09, or even 01, 02 in the seat as a school district leader, you have a recollection of what that looks like. And so it involves a lot of priority setting in terms of conversations with the board, with our staff, with our community as to, okay, what do we value? How do we prioritize this process? And then walking through those priorities of budget reductions to get to X number of dollars that you need to reduce your budget by. So it's not to say here and now that the sky is falling, but at the same time, we realize that it's very similar, if not worse, than probably what we experienced in 08, 09. And so then how can we put some of those pieces in place and start thinking about that today and prioritizing today, because we think this might be a multi-year issue for many districts across Missouri and the country.
The only thing I would add to that, having been here, is that we want to make sure we couch the conversation as we value all of it or we wouldn't be doing it now. Yep. So it can't be, well, we're going to prioritize the things we value and not prioritize the things we don't value. It's a very difficult conversation about cutting things that we value, but it's hopefully a temporary cut. So about everything you just said, that's the only thing that I would be careful about, is talking about what we value, because it gets really difficult, and people need to know that, yes, we value Latin, or I'm not on TV so I can say these things, but at the same time we have to do these things, and they're not, this math is math.
And I guess what I'm trying to get my head around is, Cindy, I heard you say that at this point, preserving the formula. how are there triggers in the next 30 days where we think they may revisit that, and we might get a different answer, or is it just everybody's hopeful that we can preserve the formula, and in August it's clear that that's not going to happen once we've gotten the final 2019 income tax in, and everybody's slow to respond and winds up being off by big numbers, and it was hopefully things improve, but if they don't, what are the time frames when we'll make some decisions and who's going to be the up-to-date gauge of where we're going to be, I guess is what I'm trying to understand. And I don't know that we won't know, we won't some of it for a long time, but I'm just afraid that there's a lot of people that are saying, yeah, hopefully we can keep the formula, and it doesn't end up being a reality.
I think there are two critical triggers, and Cindy, jump in too if you had something. The two critical triggers for me is the budget needs to pass both houses of the legislature, and then the governor has to sign the budget. And so in between those two pieces, I think that's where we sit in some volatile space, knowing that every week, every day even, we're getting new information at the state level in terms of revenues and collections, sales tax performance, kind of those pieces. So I think that's our ability to wait and see on some of these budget pieces that we're talking about. Those are really kind of the only triggers. But then from a revenue standpoint, we know what our streams are. So then it's the sales tax piece, it's the casino dollars, it's the formula. And that's not even really talking about the local assessment part. We know that we're good for this fiscal year. The local assessment piece will likely be an issue as we look at December and how people are paying those payments, let alone what collections look like next spring as we receive the bulk of those property tax revenues. Cindy, were you going to add something?
Now, to piggyback on that, it also hinges upon how fast we recover, how fast we get back out there, how fast people buy, and if people do get back out there, are they back out there spending money so that state revenues have a chance to recover? Are people going to pay their taxes in July? Are people going to continue paying estimated payments in July? Really, until those things happen, we don't have a big picture about the state revenue, other than we know to date it's bad. So as soon as the budget is passed and signed, then we have that next step. When do the revenues start coming in and how they recover? So I think.
When's the budget expected to be signed?
It has to be passed this week, I believe, and then on to the governor. Is that right, Jeremy?
By the end of the session, so May 8th, I believe, was their target date. And then from the governor's standpoint, I believe he goes further into June even. I'm not exactly sure when his drop dead date is, but I believe that's correct.
Okay.
And I would assume too that administration is looking at that you guys and your team are looking at what's on the short list. It's not something that has to be publicized. It's not something that has to come before the board yet, but if we're X% short, here's generally the areas we've got to start looking at, as opposed to starting from scratch as soon as we find out that we're 15% short, for example.
Right, correct. And so some of those plans have already been put in place, but fast forward to the fall, as we get a better picture of how this is playing out, right? What you end up having a conversation around first and foremost is what are those priorities, like we've talked about. And then in some of those areas where you are identifying where your reductions are going to be, to your point, Scott, it's the process of identifying some alternatives. We might make a cut here, but here's an alternative to be able to support students in XYZ program. So just know that that conversation is a collaborative dialogue in which we identify what our priorities are, having been through this. Usually the first priority is protect the classroom. And then you kind of work from there. And then as you're able to identify where your revenue streams are lagging and quantify that, I think that's secondly where you're able to say, okay, we have a 5% reduction or 10% or 20% reduction, and how are we going to approach that? Whether it's taking advantage of some low-hanging fruit, those one-time expenditures, we're already doing those pieces, or whether it gets beyond that to be able to say, okay, we need every budget and department and school to look at their budget line items and do a reduction that equates to 5% or 10% or 15%, and then go from there. Just know that we're not at that point just yet, because we're still waiting to try to assess the overall economic impact, both locally and at the state level. The other thing that I would add in here is that you have this influx of federal stimulus dollars at the same time that, if it resembles 2008, 2009, there are issues of supplementing your budget as compared to supplanting your budget. But then we know that oftentimes with federal stimulus dollars, you also have strings attached as to what those dollars can be spent toward.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, that we're not waiting for the hammer to drop before we start planning.
Yeah, not at all.
Thank you.
Right. Scott, I think you and I are kind of in the same place with thinking about this. If we really expect that this could be worse than 2008, 2009, we need to at least have some thoughts about where we go if we have to go really deep and it gets painful. And that was one of the things that we were prepared for in 2008, 2009, and had to go there. So we shouldn't wait too long to be thinking about those things. But we probably also should think about where we have opportunities. I don't know if that makes sense, but if we think about leaning into this as an opportunity for transformation, one of the things we had to go to in 2008, 2009 was in sacred cows and getting rid of things that we didn't need to be doing anymore. And it forced us to think about those things. So I would just offer that as, we need to be prepared, have thoughts about what we need to do if it gets painful. Okay,
and I apologize for queuing this up under the salary category, because it really probably was more of a conversation around the budget, not specific to salary, but I just finally got it.
Yes, I would add to that, David. It would not just salary. So we need to look at the whole budget picture.
Anything else on that item? All right, I think we're ready to move on to real world learning grant. Dr. Tucker.
Yeah, the next item then, we wanted to give you an update on our progress, collaboration with districts and the Kaufman Foundation. We have a couple of key milestones coming up this month, so we'll turn it over to Dr. Moore to walk us through an update on real world learning.
Thank you. So this year, as you know, we had the opportunity to receive a grant from Kaufman to continue our work with real world learning. And through that grant this year, we were able to have several opportunities for collaboration among teachers, externships. We sent teachers, administrators, and our career navigators to places across the country to see what other school districts were doing with regard to real world learning and just innovation in general. So that was very beneficial. Unfortunately, we had a few trips planned for this spring that we didn't get to partake in, but we have had some virtual learning opportunities through Getting Smart, where they've had some tours and some different webinars so that we can participate and still learn what other people are doing. As Dr. Tucker said, we're coming up on some milestones here. On May 15th, we have to submit a proposal for a 3-year strategic plan through Kaufman. And then on May 27th, Dr. Tucker will give a presentation on what we would like to do over the next 3 years, what we would like to accomplish over the next 3 years. So this process has allowed us to really look at what we've accomplished already through our courses, our Lbarty virtual online platform, through Colleen Jones, who you know is just a tremendous asset in this area, the work of the career navigators, and the work of our high school study team. So as we have been talking through this and thinking about the next 3 years, part of that strategic plan is setting up what we want to accomplish during that time. That would include increasing the number of market value asset opportunities, so internships, job shadowing, AP course opportunities, dual credit. The list goes on and on about what we would like to give our students opportunities to do. We, as I shared with you, I believe in January, we would like to have a tiered diploma system starting with the class of 2023, so that market value assets would be tied to their diploma, and that they could walk across the stage not only with the 25.5 credits, but that they would also have a second page transcript that would show all of the things that they've done over their time in LPS. We are, over the next 3 years, going to hopefully implement the micro school. So we're working on 2 right now, one that's tied to cybersecurity and just emerging technologies, and the other that is the global micro school. So we're excited about that. We were hoping to launch one in the fall, but it's been difficult just to kind of get that going with the process that we're in, and trying to get people out and learn a little bit more. So our goal for both of those will be the 21-22 school year. We also are looking to increase the number of opportunities pre-K through 12. So looking at that, exploring, experiencing, and then immersing in careers and different opportunities for students as they go through the system. Colleen and the career navigators have done a great job of coming up with virtual internships. So we feel like that is also an opportunity that we need to continue to work on and grow for our students, given the situation that we're in now. We're hopeful that we can continue our staff's professional learning through visits over the next few years. If those visits don't occur through the grant, we hope that we can still continue the virtual meetings. We will continue our partnerships with Getting Smart, Digital Promise, Big Picture Learning, and there are others. I would add that, Getting Smart has been a great group for us to work with. We've been consulting with them, and Rebecca Middles, who I've developed a good relationship with, we talk about once a week now, just about things that are going on and how she can help us. And we have a meeting planned for next week with the high schools, so that we can continue the work on the global micro school. And then the last thing I'll just say is that it's been nice because with Kaufman, they want to see how we're going to tie our real world learning into our strategic plan. And I feel like we're already there. If you look at our strategic plan, there's 8, 9, 10 of the different areas that are tied to this. So we're really in a good place to continue that work with the hopes that Kaufman will help us with that process. And I will leave it at that. Dr. Tucker, if you want to add anything.
Again, I think Julie mentioned it earlier on, is every Friday, there's a morning webinar, and then in the afternoon, there's kind of a virtual tour where they give highlights of schools across the nation, as well as in our region, even our own district, in terms of where market value assets are really thriving or developing, expanding. So during this period of shelter in place, it's been interesting to watch our career navigators continue to offer up opportunities, even in a virtual environment. So the majority of those internship experiences have flipped over to virtual, which has been interesting because, in my mind, for us to be able to take this to scale, you have to be able to offer a virtual option. And so there were a lot of question marks prior to really, March 15th. Now that we're past March 15th and we've actually done it virtually, we have a little bit of a sense of what this looks like. So we've kind of answered that question, or been pushed into answering that question. Because when you start thinking about 100% of our students with a market value asset, that can be pretty daunting, if not for a solution like a virtual environment. So we're excited about that. And as Dr. Moore mentioned too, really already on the way to doing this work within our strategic plan. So continue to appreciate the districts that are collaborating with us, but then also Kaufman and getting smart as we continue to think about that network. So questions in terms of our real world learning work or comments, discussion?
I know you guys have been taking advantage of the Kaufman opportunity and leading, and I know Kaufman appreciates you guys and your forward thinking about this stuff and how you're sharing with some of the other schools who are really pushing hard. Julie, one of the things that struck me is when you said we haven't been able to take the physical trips to see some of the things and talk to people in person. And so it's been virtual instead, kind of connecting it back to what Jeremy mentioned about student internships. I wonder if that creates an opportunity to give some of our students an opportunity to play a more active role in seeing what's going on some of this program development and playing along with you guys as you figure out how to shape the program.
I think that's a great idea. Just thinking about, I was watching some of the videos that came out a few weeks ago from this webinar and seeing what they offer. And I thought about that, like, how do we get students to look at this and see what it is that they want, right? Instead of us offering like some ideas to them and saying, yes or no, do you like this? You know, letting them create some of those opportunities.
And realize how hard it is, how complicated it is to put some of these things together and all the variables that you have to consider. I mean, it's a great real world experience, what you're doing right now to build these programs from scratch.
Well, and I'm thankful for Kaufman giving us this opportunity, because as we talk about budgets, you know, and we try to continue to plan, the question is, can we do this? And so, you know, we're trying to build a budget for 3 years with them and hopefully, and through our own budget, but what is it that we can do, you know, with their support, so that it's nice to have that.
Good work.
I think that's it, Andy.
All right, then let's talk re-entry planning.
So I'm going to share my screen with you here briefly, and a lot of our conversation that we've already had this morning kind of leads us to this piece as we think about kind of where we're at and where we could potentially be headed already as we think about reentry plans, whether it be our city, our county, the state, and kind of walking through those pieces. The one thing before we dive too much into the slide deck that you have in board docs, the one thing that we are already seeing, as this is pretty polarizing, so as we talk about navigating polarities, and we've teed that up a few times, just know that even in our community, we have extreme perspectives or points of view that are, you know, we should have lifted the shelter in place order a long time ago, or we never should have had it. You know, this is kind of a scam, so to speak. We've got that perspective on this extreme. On the far extreme, you've got the other perspective that says, how, you know, you guys really should not be even considering having summer school or opening your doors until a vaccine is in place, right? So that can be incredibly polarizing. And I would have even imagined that in this Zoom meeting, we have varying perspectives. And so I want to tee that up first by recognizing it, but then secondly, by leading with health and safety of our students. Knowing that for us to re-enter into, whether it's virtual summer school, as we'll talk about here in a little bit, or that eventual face-to-face offering, be it later in the fall or perhaps even during the summer, we want to keep the health and safety of students and staff at the forefront. And so I think if we lead with that in mind, and then we respond accordingly with Center for Disease Control guidelines or the health department guidelines, and are in lockstep with those entities that are the experts in the field, I think that's where our best decisions will be made. And so as we've thought about reentry planning over the course of the last really few weeks, it's involving really two areas: the opportunity to regroup, get back together, and what that looks like, and some of those considerations as we talk about reentry, But then there's also a reimagining opportunity or an innovative opportunity to think through what we've been through, what we're currently going through, what's worked well, what has not worked well, how do we regroup, how do we plan forward in the event that we have an additional reoccurrence or an additional shelter-in-place order that's issued, be it earlier or later, or if we have multiple occurrences over the course of the next year or two, how do we leverage everything that we have learned and take advantage of that to prepare us or equip us to support kids, whether it be face-to-face in a classroom or whether it be at home. So a few things that we're working through, and again, this is just a brush stroke because every single one of these bullets and more that we talk about, there are details upon details upon details that, believe me, we're talking about or we're asking the question, trapping that question to be able to plan through. So as we think about reentry planning, putting together a dedicated committee, we've asked Steve Anderson to run point on that, and he'll talk about that particular committee here in a little bit, but it does involve both operations and academics representation. I shared with you an article and an update earlier about the importance of scenario planning. To David's point earlier, whether it's tabletop activities or investigating and walking through multiple scenarios, we had a brief discussion with our strategic leadership team, having read that article yesterday, in terms of working through their takeaways and their perceptions. And what we learned was they were sharing their takeaways that included, really an opportunity to rethink, but an opportunity as you're walking through scenarios to be able to not just fall back or lean on that crutch that might be the familiar, the traditional, the known, but then really exploring multiple scenarios, even those that might seemingly be as far-fetched as possible, but yet there's value in planning for that because there may be portions within that scenario that are applicable elsewhere. And so really being intentional about how we walk through scenarios. And then we know certainly that throughout this process, communication is an important piece, whether it's communicating to the board, communicating to our staff, our students, our families, and recommunicating, because we know so much of this is fluid and so much of this can change really pretty quickly. We also spent some time earlier this morning talking about the economic impact and planning for that, of which we are already doing. One of the resources that I shared with the Kaufman Foundation, if you're not familiar with this text, I don't know if it shows up on the screen, but it's Stretching the School District Dollar. It's a text that was written by Frederick Hess. It's dated, it's back in 2010, but it speaks to everything that we've mentioned this morning in the importance of planning, getting out in front of things as compared to the last minute or waiting and seeing. So priority setting, identifying those alternatives, tackling those sacred cows, a lot of those pieces that we've already spoken to, but identifying what the near term, the midterm, and that long-term piece looks like as compared to local, state, federal dollars, knowing that this may likely last a couple of years. As we think about the post-pandemic period, as we exit and we start easing up on some of those restrictions that have been put upon families, we also know that there are those families or students that have stayed on track academically, and perhaps some that actually were able to accelerate in terms of gains that were made. But we're certainly concerned about those students that perhaps have had some losses in terms of their academic performance. In addition to those academic gains or losses, we know that right now is incredibly kind of a unique period in terms of the social emotional well-being of our learners. So social emotional learning being at top of mind, as well as adverse childhood experiences or trauma that families may have experienced. And a couple of examples that come to mind might be that student that lost a loved one for whatever reason, be it coronavirus or something else, that hasn't been able to walk through that typical grieving process because they're sheltered in place. Be it a close family member not being able to go to a funeral, not being able to have that closure, whatever the case may be, those are traumatic experiences that some are experiencing. In addition, we know that home life might be an issue for some of our families. So those may be traumatic experiences as well, or the loss of a job. So as we come out of this, focusing on the academic gains and losses of students, but then also their well-being and where they are at. And I would couple that by adding in a focus on staff. As we focus on staff and their well-being, some that may still have anxieties or fears as we come out of a pandemic, some that may have mental health needs that we need to support them through. How do we reopen successfully while taking into account some of the medical needs or mental health needs of both our students and our staff, and alternative options for them. In addition to that, navigating multiple rounds of school closures in the future. What does that look like as we think about reentry? And then lastly, we'll talk about this in a little bit, our network, be it partnering with the Kaufman Foundation, who is also putting together a team to talk about reopening. We convene on Friday with a group of superintendents across the region, whether it's collaborating with our community partners, whether it's collaboration with a variety of health agencies. That's our network. And on the call this morning is Kathy Ellemeyer, and we lean on her regularly as it relates to Clay County Health Department and some guidance there in terms of best practices. We kept her incredibly busy, particularly in the first few weeks as we were navigating the closure, and then now pivoting to reentry. On the flip side of that reentry conversation are reimagining opportunities. And so as we've collaborated with a variety of groups, really focusing on our opportunity to reimagine education and learning experiences for learners, the parent, the teacher, as well as our system and structures. Obviously leading with that focus on health and safety, the importance of relationships, whether it's a face-to-face environment or a virtual environment as we've experienced, and then the importance of communication. And again, appreciate everyone for their efforts throughout this shelter-in-place or learning at home experience to constantly be in contact and communicate and reiterate and revise as we go. In addition to that, how do we gauge the well-being of our students? As we mentioned academically, the social emotional learning piece, shifting more ownership to learners through increased agency, and then what do new learning environments and structures look like? Whether it's that traditional face-to-face offering or a hybrid type offering in terms of multiple delivery models where students and parents both have choice in a traditional approach as compared to a virtual approach, as compared to a hybrid approach. We're really exploring those possibilities. And then how do we allow for flexibility within our staff? We had already folded that staffing flexibility and ability to work remotely into our strategic plan. And so we're constantly navigating that and how to personalize experiences for both our students and staff. The last thing that I would mention as we lean on some of our networks like Getting Smart, as we think about other groups that are out there on the academic side, really their emphasis in reentry planning and reopening is opportunities to accelerate areas like project-based learning, social emotional learning, real-world learning, and competency-based education. So as we're hearing that from within our network and other groups, it's pretty reassuring in the sense that we are already making headway in these areas, but how can we push on the gas pedal a little bit to be able to accelerate these that much farther? So as we think about reopening, it's really in those two veins. It's the reentry piece, but then it's also in that reimagining or innovations opportunity. At this point, I do want to pitch it over to Steve Anderson to kind of walk through a little bit more of the nuts and bolts and what he's working through with his reentry planning committee.
Thank you. So I put together an outline here to kind of guide, at least to provide just an overall framework to the work that we've kind of started to get moving on here in the last few weeks. So it did start with putting together a planning team, both operations and academic leaders. Most of the operations folks are at that table. Kathy, of course, Trey's in that group as well. And then Chris Gabriel, Scott Carr, and Rosemary Camp, and then Jason Cahill is going to join us as well. So we do have a pretty good representation across the spectrum of the district to kind of be in those leadership conversations. The next point there is a group that is formed of Northland assistant soups and chiefs that we're beginning to have a conversation starting Friday. Just making sure, as Dr. Tucker referenced, that the coordination is there, that we're all kind of keeping in touch with how each of our independent projects and plans are coming together. There's also a group of similar kind of assistant soups, and there's some soups at this group as well, and chiefs at the state level that we've been invited in to be as part of that group as well. And I think that's less of a work group and more of a let's just make sure we're sharing the work that's coming together. So there is quite a bit of that occurring. Just want to make sure that the board was aware of that. So the way we've broken this down is it starts with guidance, obviously provided by the CDC. You know, as you're aware, we're a split district with KC-Mo and then Lbarty, and then we have some rural areas in unincorporated Clay County. So we're looking at KC-Mo and their order, of course, Clay County Public Health and their order. The state of Missouri is something as well that we've consulted with. And then back to my point earlier about kind of the Kansas City region and how other districts, as their plans are coming together, we're also keeping an eye on what the state of Kansas is looking at and what they're doing. Of course, the Kauffman Foundation has been involved in those conversations as well. The next area here I mentioned is context, kind of in and around the guidance. And so there are many folks that are already kind of moving forward with plans and ideas, and some of them are very detailed. I've mentioned in here, we got the AFT, American Federation of Teachers, MSBA. MSBA released something late last week. I believe it was about 97 pages, which again, in some respects, a little overwhelming, but very helpful as we prepare our work and we can kind of make sure we're not missing anything and considering all parts of our planning process. There's a couple independent groups, Opportunity Labs, McKinsey Company, William Jewell has drafted a plan already that they've shared with us that we've consulted. We've also kept an eye on other countries that are maybe a little bit ahead of us. Few in Northern Europe, Israel's another country that's starting to kind of reintroduce and having school even as we speak. So we're keeping an eye on that. Kansas City Public Schools released something here a couple days ago as well. And again, the list goes on, added to daily, that we're keeping a very close eye on kind of how other groups are putting together drafts of what that plan might look like. The next section here is the actual plan itself. And what I've listed out, these are the primary, I guess, aspects to the plan. So we've mentioned earlier, Dr. Vogelaar mentioned earlier that the staffing piece, we've already been in communication with our staff right out of the gate. We're going to continue to message to them the expectations in and around they're kind of coming back to work. We have a lot of folks on the operations side already back to work. And of course, how we message that, how we make sure that all proper precautions are being taken and making sure that that's being handled in the appropriate way. We've also talked and shared with the board kind of in and around facility and site access and have made sure that we are keeping an eye on our facilities, making sure that if people are in our buildings or on our sites that they're complying with all guidance that is out there currently. And we'll continue to do and monitor that. Summer school, I won't speak to that at all. I know Christopher Hand's going to speak to that in a minute, but that's obviously another part of that work. Childcare, we've had several conversations in and around this, both as part of summer school, part of next school year with Kids Zone, but also independently, and what that might look like if we try to scale up and introduce that even this summer, how that could be conducted again in compliance with all the guidance provided by KC-Mo and the of course, activities and events. Dr. Moore was referencing graduation, kindergarten roundup, sports, camps. There are many different moving parts to that, as you can all imagine. So that's another important part of our conversation and our work. And then the last, and this is really where our main focus is in kind of that little bit longer term look into August, is what does next school year look like? And so that gives you just a sense of the various focus areas of the plan. And then dropping down here to the last section, this just gives you kind of in really broad terms, there's Dr. Tucker mentioned detail. There's a whole lot more detail here, but I just wanted to give you a bit of the framework for the conversations we're having. Communication obviously is a big part of all that we do, and making sure that we stay in front of that. We communicate on a regular basis, especially as we start working through in the development of the plan. The phasing and fluid guidance is, as you're probably aware, with both the Clay County plan in the KCMO plan. There are various stages and phases that ramp up over time. And obviously, if all progresses well, which is an if, but if it progresses well, that's going to have an effect on how much we can do and when we can do it in terms of school and summer school and camps and all those things. So that's an important component to it. And just that you're aware, our group is really focusing on when we're looking at next in the fall and August is really there's three potential scenarios. One is that there is no in-person school. One is that there is partial in-person and then partial virtual. And then the third would be full in-person. And so we're looking at all three of those and what that all might look like. Compliance obviously is critical. So kind of tying back to the guidance provided by the Clay County and KCMO and the state. Populations and groups, and by that I mean we have to really take account to our at-risk, high-risk populations and how they're handled. Our SPED folks, our SPED kids are obviously a unique population that we need to be tuned into as well. And then you have those who are, as mentioned earlier, maybe fearful or concerned and maybe by choice are not comfortable, and how we address that as well. Preparations, this is probably right now the most urgent, is making sure that as we're having these conversations about, and I mentioned below that, procurement, having conversations about being prepared for the startup. You know, do we have all the equipment? Do we have the proper disinfectants? We've ordered digital scan thermometers. We've ordered masks for staff. So we're doing a lot of that work right now, and we're having conversations in and around kind of newer technologies to assist us in as we prepare for rolling back to school. But then also just kind of procuring some of the basic stuff that we need to have on hand if we were to roll back come August. So that's a real high level kind of where we're at, where we're heading. We're meeting weekly formally as a group, but there's a lot of parts and people in that group that are connecting throughout the week. Of course, we're talking about this every day as well. And I did want to just real quickly mention, you know, with Kathy here, and certainly willing to take any questions myself, but then if she has anything to add or if there are questions for either of us, we'd be happy to take that. So that's a recap.
Any questions from the group?
Yeah, I think, you know, hey, look, kudos on all the work that you guys are doing. I mean, I think we'll all echo the effort that you're putting forward on scenario planning and making sure we're prepared. I think that's fantastic. My primary question probably revolves around connectivity and, you know, internet, et cetera, network. And I know Trey's probably in there with you, so maybe he can shed some light on this as well. But are we seeing any issues from a connectivity standpoint as we kind of bundle up all these people now on our network at a greater rate?
So Trey is here with us. So then in terms of being able to answer that, I will say this, and then we can have him chime in. In terms of assessing where students and families are at, even some staff, because some staff have connectivity issues, we feel like we've done a good job in supporting them through remote devices. But then at the same time, the tech department has set up within our first floor entry kind of a triage or their own little geek squad in being able to help students and staff over the course of this closure. You know, this part's broken, or I need a new extension cable, or whatever the case may be. And so not a day goes by where parents aren't coming and going and dropping off their device or picking up their repaired item. So anything to share, Trey, in terms of connectivity or concerns looking ahead?
No, I don't. I mean, as far as we know right now, we've been able to satisfy any requests that have come in from parents or kids who need access. So, I mean, that's a good thing that, you know, we're not being able to tell people that we can't help them, and we still have some available devices to hand out should somebody contact us today.
The other thing is we think we can leverage some of those federal dollars to continue to just support infrastructure and connectivity needs. One of the big lifts that is getting ready to happen is trading out devices K through 12. As we think about our process we were walking through for refresh and switching over to Apple products, be it iPad distribution or new laptops for students and staff. That's why part of those end of year closeout procedures to get their older devices is so critical. And then plan over the course of the summer to be able to get ready for that redistribution in August. So
What is, I think we've covered this before, but what is the status of having to provide actual internet access for students? Do you kind of have general numbers around that?
I think it's around, it's a pretty low number. I mean, we're talking 50 to 60.
Okay. It's not 300. Okay.
No. Yeah. It's not a large number at all.
Okay. I was just curious. Thank you.
what other questions or discussion points in and around the reentry plan conversation?
The only other thing, Steve, I'm sure that you're approaching it this way, but you described the three scenarios of all virtual, all in person, and then a combination. And then as part of that, is there also conversation, about needing to move in between those things fluidly?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, especially back to not knowing what the guidance will look like, right, and how that can ebb and flow. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, as we're anticipating a potential spike again in the fall, right, we might need to flip again.
And on that note, some of the data that we're already seeing, whether it was the survey we administered a couple of weeks ago or the survey over this last weekend in and around summer school, a few parents that are commenting, hey, I'm not bringing my child back until there's a vaccine for coronavirus, right? Or until I have some additional assurance that the all clear truly is all clear. So then what do we do for those families in terms of that virtual option? So we're talking a little bit right now about even piloting this summer what a possible K-5 virtual school would look like, and being able to get some semblance of that in place over the summer so that when August comes, for those families that do have those reservations or concerns, we can offer that option. But yet when they're ready, transition them back into the school environment pretty seamlessly. But then what does a kind of an in-between option look like, which could end up being that hybrid model where, yeah, I want to be able to have my kids home virtually and facilitate learning from home, but I do want to take advantage of some of those extracurricular opportunities or electives. So really having those conversations rather than just closing the door and putting a lid on it, so to speak, and that option not being available to families. So more to come in that respect.
It gets to be multidimensional pretty quickly when you think about, we are now partially open, but some students want to stay, families want to stay home, but they may need access to some of the tools or the library resources or whatever.
Yeah. And the continuity and quality of the experience is key as well. You don't want one to be watered down compared to the other. So they need to all be rich experiences and opportunities. But again, that the unknown is, okay, how frequent are you in and out of these types of closures? Anybody's guess on this Zoom meeting is as good as anyone's, but nonetheless planning for all of those scenarios. Kathy, since you've joined us this morning, do you have any thoughts or anything that you want to share? We want to give you that opportunity as well from your vantage point.
Thank you for having me today. I just would like to interject just kind of on the county level, just the work that continues to go on, and that is what's going to inform us really. And I know you all realize that already, but this, it feels like with the recovery steps that were outlined for our county, I think are really provide some really sound, really good, steps that are going to be undertaken here, and we're in recovery step number 1. And so for the next 4 weeks, we're doing those things that are outlined as a county, and that involves our organization and businesses throughout our county. so what's really going to inform us is over the summer to see how this all kind of comes about and to see how the virus is going to act and how it is going to act when we start congregating together a little more, with the step 2 of being mass gathering, increased to 50 or fewer. And I think that it is a very fluid situation. So we'll just have to see how that all works. I liked what Steve made a comment yesterday, Steve Anderson, about that, and it really paints the picture right now where we're at is, it's a simple statement that, the virus is still out there, and so the danger has not gone away. And the reason for these recovery steps and why we've entered into this and starting to reopen is, yes, the danger is still out there, but right now we have enough ICU beds for all of you right now, or we have enough to take care of you. And so that's why we're in, that is true. We've got this, it's still there, and let's see how it acts and how it reacts when we all start kind of getting out there and taking our precautions. And the goal is still that we hope that it's a slow, exposure. So people that are exposed have the necessary health services that they need. And hoping also to stave off a lot of exposure until a vaccine is developed, and that is, or effective treatment is developed. And that's the ultimate goal, is let's not have a ton of people getting this because it's acting so strangely with different folks. So anyway, I guess just speaking from that county level, and then how do we react to that as a district? And so I appreciated Dr. Tucker, relying on our guidance from the CDC and from our county to inform our decisions. And so as we work through that, we'll work through that systematically and with a guarded approach there with that, and take care of kids and their health first, and our staff and all of us in our community. So I don't know if I have any specific tips to share with that. I've got lots of stuff that we're working through and that I can contain there. But any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, and greatly appreciate Kathy's support and expertise. The other thing, as you've picked up, I'm sure, on this reentry plan conversation, is our unique location in straddling multiple reentry plans from Kansas City, Missouri, and then also Clay County Health Department, and being able to navigate the two. That's been a little bit of a challenge. We have more guidance from the county, and we have a little bit better relationship with the county in terms of that constant contact as we do with Kansas City. Not that the relationship's bad, it's just that we're not as closely engaged with them. So I believe there's additional guidance that's coming from the city of Kansas City the next few days regarding that May 15th deadline or date that they've identified to start easing those restrictions. So I think that rounds out our reentry plan item for the agenda, unless there are additional questions that the board may have.
No, and I'm sure it's contained within, the thoughts that you guys are headed through, but, extracurriculars, I'm assuming, are a part of this reentry plan as well, as we think about how that looks.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some guidance that are getting pushed out by the CDC as far as like summer school and school extracurriculars, camps, and so forth. The other piece to that would be guidance from the Missouri State High School Activities Association, and kind of leaning on what their expertise or recommendations are as well. So we know that's an integral part for students. And for a lot of kids, that's what keeps them going as far as engagement in clubs and sports. We certainly want to keep health and safety top of mind there as well, particularly as it relates to those spectator events and the ability for those activities to convene in the fall. So yeah, that's among the topics that we've identified to be able to find a solution for.
Yeah, and I would just assure too that even yesterday in our conversation, we were talking quite a bit about fine arts and band and orchestra and performance, and that is becoming an area of focus now with I'm not gonna be able to say the word, Kathy, you can help me out, but the projecting of the aerosols is more pronounced in those environments. And of course, PE, we've talked about that as well. So those are definitely part of our conversations.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Then we will move on to our summer school update.
So our last agenda item this morning is for summer school. And again, appreciate the Academic Services Department for their work. Along with reentry planning, this has been a hot topic as we think about prepping for summer school and that looking a little bit differently. I'm going to share my screen again with the slides that you have within board docs. And then we will turn it over to Mr. Hand to give us an update on summer school for 2020 summer.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker. I'm going to share with you today just where we are at right now with summer school at this moment. I want to thank right off the bat operations, special education, academic services, and Dallas Communication to really help develop this plan as we talked about it being fluid as we go through summer school. Really briefly, what I'm going to talk about today is really drivers that we're using as we develop our plan, thought processes, the data that we're using through summer school, and we've gathered already, recommendations and guidelines from DESE regarding summer school specifically, and then the overall proposal. As you know, we sent to you, I believe, 7 or 8 different ideas for summer school about a month and a half back, and now we're landing on one proposal that we're going to move forward with at this time, and then the timeline of what it's going to take to move that proposal. So to begin with, we convened the Summer School Advisory Committee, and we had a Zoom with them, and it's made up of coaches, students, and teachers throughout the district, as well as administration. And we also convened with 9 other KC area districts. We hosted that through Lbarty Public Schools to share ideas and collaborate, because we all know we're better together when working through this. And through that process, the drivers we discovered were the social, emotional, and academic well-being of students, and then putting parents and staff back to work in the LPS community, and then also rebuilding our community, instilling hope. The thought process we found throughout our work together in clinging is that we couldn't cling to models of the past and an unclear present. We couldn't get overwhelmed with obstacles that we were finding at each district and each area in terms of operations, building level ideas, things like that. And the need to make change for different results, but not just for change's sake. And then we were also finding that we couldn't just choose the easiest solution. Sometimes we have to look for option X, the solution that's a little bit more out there. I think Dr. Tucker talked about that a little bit earlier. And that as this is a fluid process, we know that mistakes are pathways to new discoveries as we grow and learn and move through this plan and proposal. So what data do we have at this time? We have enrollment data. So we kept enrollment open all the way. It's still open today. If you wanted to enroll for summer school, we have upwards of over 2,000, closer to 3,000 if you count other areas of the district. We have over 1,000 students that are enrolled in the online summer school for the high school. And we have about 536 applications for teachers and staff for summer school at this time. We also have data from the pandemic survey that Dr. Tucker talked about. And then I'm going to share with you the latest data we have from the summer school feedback data, as well as some information we have about ESY students and working with Dr. Chris Martin in terms of SEL student data as well. So first off, we looked into getting feedback from various stakeholders at this time. And so parents, specifically in K through 8, we sent a survey out last Friday at around 4 o'clock. The analysis here you can see is a brief analysis of what we found during that time frame. We had over 1,636 submissions into the feedback survey. And as you can see there below, parents that answered questions regarding June, whether or not they wanted to attend virtual June. We broke it down into K5 numbers and 6-8 numbers. And the percentages that you see for K-5 are percentage towards K-5 students. So for example, 485 students or parents indicated that their student would take June virtual. That equals 37% of all K-5 students that were marked in the survey. 6-8 as well. So color code to see where we found people that said yes, yes the most. Of course, we found some in July for face-to-face at 70% and 58% for that time frame. We did find some interesting information about transportation as well as Kid Zone of what people answered. And you can see within here in the bullets, we broke down and how it was analyzed. We did find one piece that our data is eerily similar to Park Hill's data. They found that 68% of their patrons wanted to go face-to-face as well, close to our 70 to 58% between the two different areas. Again, Park Hill and us, face-to-face is determined by, how this moves and whether or not we can actually do that.
Hey, Christopher, just a quick question. What do we feel like what's a good number on here? I mean, to me personally, right, 37% under 40% doesn't feel real good, but what were you guys thinking?
Well, actually, in terms of thinking, 485 students, I'd look at the number, and if we could serve 485 students, that's a good number. However, you're right, that was a percentage that I thought would be higher, to be honest with you. And we're still checking it and actually looking at the survey daily. We're up to about 1,700 right now. So as we continue to move forward with this, we will continue to look at that survey, and I can share with you more survey data if you like. That's a great question, though.
And on some of the open-ended comments, we read through all of them. There were about 374, 375 individuals that responded. Yeah. Not to jump ahead, but a lot of the open-ended comments spoke to parent preferences, Nick, for that face-to-face as compared to that virtual, right? So many of them want that face-to-face experience during the course of the summer. And some of them commented, hey, we're tired. You guys have done a great job with virtual, but we're ready to close the lid on the laptop. So just know that those comments, we've read through them and reflected on them. And it's great feedback.
It is. We also found comments that people answered no to everything. And that gives us a pretty firm comment of what they were thinking in that aspect. So there's a lot of great information here, and we're going to continue to decipher through it. As we move forward to, we mentioned earlier about recommendations and guidance. DESE has given us some recommendations regarding summer school, meaning they're going to allow maximum flexibility of when we can have summer school. We can have it all the way up to the first day, almost the first day of school. But with that comes clear expectations for summer learning, and you can see that below in terms of DESE requirements for virtual summer school, as well as clear expectations for virtual summer school. And I was going to hand it over to Jeanette Westfall real quick to talk about the difference between the schooling we were doing at the end of the school year to summer school now. Jeanette, do you have a quick second?
Sure. Really, one of the things we were talking about was the fact that when we rolled into our schooling at the end of the year, it was all in, all teachers, and not a whole lot of options. And so in summer school, we recognize that our students are coming back to us by choice. And so we feel like we can set the expectations not only for learning that was established by DESE, but the way that we're going to operate in summer school. And we can give that out up front so everyone knows what they're interacting with, as opposed to everyone just has to. So that's one of the things that's helping us and guiding our work and planning as we move forward.
So if we move on to the next slide real quickly, here is the actual proposal that we have. And that is summer school would last from June 1st to June 31 in different sessions. And this might be something that you have seen before when we gave you the 7 different proposals before. So there would be a session 1, which would be June 1st to June 26th. At the high school, they would be online only. And we've actually begun working with Dr. Moore on meeting with her about online high school. And so that is moving forward very rapidly at this time. And it will consist of credit recovery, ESY, virtual courses. At the elementary level, though, it is going to look different. There's going to be a PBL focus with emphasis on math and reading, which would be a half-day learning for students in a group that would be AM. And then with the PM section, we're still working on whether we would do a Thrive board or other pieces. Dr. Westfall, you want to hit on anything else with that area?
No, just that we're making sure that we have the learning options that we know our students are interested in and making sure that we meet those needs. So that's really what we're focusing on.
And so this proposal also falls in line with all the DESE requirements that you have to be tied to an assessment of some sort throughout that time frame. You also have to have a clear emphasis on feedback between teachers, lessons tied to strategies and standards. And so we have a lot of, there you go, Dr. Tucker. And so a lot of that goes along with daily feedback online between the teacher and the student. So we're working on an actual schedule that would look online, and that's something that we can bring back at a later time frame, but we are kind of working through with our district coaches on what that would look like. Same with middle school, PBL focus with emphasis on math and reading. And then we would also have an online creative arts academy that Aaron Money is working on right now, and possibly a development of a health academy, virtual courses online for health and PE for students in 6A. The second session looks a little different, and that is from July 6th to the 31st. And we emphasize that this is a customized AM/PM face-to-face format. And why we say that is because, as Steve mentioned, this is a changing process and we have to look at where we are at that time. But this would be based on Clay County, State of Missouri, KCMO reentry plans, health plans. And we would also look at a customized AM/PM face-to-face. Now, if we could not do this, this would roll over to a virtual right away. And therefore, we would have a virtual Summer Academy K-5, which would have a more online class format, and a virtual Summer Academy online, also for students 6 through 8, which could be a pilot for the coming year that Dr. Tucker mentioned regarding possible virtual school for students that are uneasy about reentry during the fall. Dr. Tucker, do you want to add any other piece to that?
No, I think it's just the realization that we will likely face some of those inquiries from parents. And so how do we prepare for that and continue to keep them as part of our system and our district, knowing that there will be some for-profit providers that try to enter into that space as well. So we prefer to have them here, and we prefer to be able to facilitate their needs and allow them to transition back into the regular classroom setting whenever they're comfortable. So again, keeping that option on the table and exploring a variety of those scenarios, and how best can we kind of test drive that over the course of the month of June or July. So appreciate academic services to being receptive to that and kind of exploring that possibility.
So a lot of this work has been seeking the unexpected. So in the last slide, we did give you a timeline, and this is just a very vague timeline of the work that's being done in order for this to happen. Everything from continuing in April to summer enrollment process. And I want to thank Lisa Johnson, who works with me. If you know Lisa, she's on top of it every day and answers every phone call. We've had a lot of wonderful phone calls and emails and texts from parents thanking us for continuing to take and listen to them for summer school, but also rolls into summer recommendations for the district, from DESE to staffing, to actually looking at contacting parents again to authenticate their online enrollment. So we have all these parents that have said they want to do this, but we have to then reestablish with them to say, here's our current plan. Are you still interested in being part of summer school? And then that timeline goes all the way through August. And as you can see there, we continue to review CDC, Missouri, KCMO, Lbarty reentry plans as we go through this format. And that's really the quick update. Any questions as of this time?
For the virtual, or I'm sorry, for the online in July, or the face-to-face in July, what the group sizes that we're thinking about at this point? Is it 25 to 30, or is it something smaller?
For the online, is that what you said, David?
Sorry, for the face-to-face.
So the face-to-face this time is really working with the reentry group to see what that would be and the guidelines that we would find. I can tell you that the virtual group right now would be 10 to 15 in an AM and then 10 to 15 in a PM with an AM and PM group to work with. We've been the same thing as what Steve mentioned, was looking at other countries, looking at other districts, been in close contact with districts in Illinois as well and what they are doing in terms of reentry there. I think that right now that would really come from operations and from us to work together to see how we could do that.
But traditionally, those groups in previous years have been larger than that 10 to 15.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes.
And
25.
from the city and county plans, I think the best guidance we have right now is from Clay County.
Yes.
And Kathy mentioned that earlier. There are 4 phases. In phase 2, there are 4 steps. And so then as you walk through those steps, each of which last 4 weeks, the event and group gathering sizes only go up. So it starts with 10, and then I think it jumps. Does it jump to 25 or 50, Kathy?
To 50. I think it starts at 25 in the final draft, and then it jumps to 50. And step 3 is 100. Step 4 is 250.
So then as we've kind of mapped that out, David, it's mapped out, May, June, July. And so by the time we hit July, if we're keeping in sync with those guidelines, we feel we can do some face-to-face, albeit on my end, I question if we want families to get back to work sooner than July, then what type of a childcare option are we offering? Whether it is a kid zone option or whether it's a face-to-face summer school option, that question has yet to be unanswered, really, either from Kansas City or from Clay County. Because I am of the opinion that that's going to become an issue very quickly as staff, employees are going back to their respective businesses or organization for employment face-to-face. We're going to have to provide a solution for their children. No one seemingly is stepping in and giving an answer for that. So that's something that we're watching, whether or not we need to trigger something here in May or whether we need to look at a face-to-face option in June. Let alone July. So that's a huge question mark on that particular item.
Okay.
So to that point, how, as we prepare and get ready for this, do we feel comfortable that we'll have access to personal protective equipment that staff will need?
Yeah, we're still working through that. What I will tell you is we've ordered cloth masks for all of staff. And each will get 2. And so that's obviously one part of that. The custodial facilities maintenance crew is working diligently on securing enough disinfecting, the hand sanitizers and make sure we have the proper soaps and everything in place. And then the other one would be the screening side of this. So I mentioned earlier, we have ordered, I think it was 150, Kathy, is that right? Digital scanning thermometers. And so that would be another part to that. And those should be coming in here within the next month. So obviously that ties into a lot of this planning as well, but we got out in front of that massive wave on the procurement side. So we felt pretty good about that. We were able to kind of secure several orders and just in time. So that does help us out on that end.
Okay.
And I think when we are able to get face-to-face with students, whether it's sooner or in the fall, leaning on the CDC guidance and Clay County guidance to say, here's what it needs to look like and here are the precautions you need to have in place. I'm expecting that in the event that doesn't happen. We could certainly create our own guidance, and I would certainly lean on health services to establish that. But I think for the sake of continuity across districts in our region and the county, I think there's some uniform guidance that needs to be able to be pushed out that says, here's what schools can do to resume or to have that face-to-face contact. If you keep in mind, throughout this closure, we have had childcare facilities within our region that are fully functioning and operating and continuing. So there have been provisions put in place for them to operate. How can we learn from them and couple that with the guidance that we see from those health departments?
So one additional question, and this is, I can't remember all the funding, but summer school is funded how?
You want to speak to that, Cindy?
There's a maximum number of hours that we collect, and it's submitted to DESE just like ADA, and an ADA is calculated, and then that is combined with the school year ADA to make a weighted average daily attendance, which then the foundation formula pays out based on that.
Okay.
So there's a maximum. You can't keep getting paid out on all of it.
Any other questions regarding summer school or discussion items?
Anything else? All right. Thank you all, and thank you for joining us this morning, everyone, for all the reports. I believe we are now ready for a motion to adjourn to closed.
Move the board adjourn to closed session, including any record or vote for the purpose of discussing personnel as provided by law. Subsection 610-0213-13 RSMO.
Second.
Discussion. Time for a vote, please.
AJ,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Angie, Angie, you're muted.
Sorry. Yes.
Thank you. Nick,
Yes.
Kim Marie,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
motion carries.
All right, we are adjourned to close. So everyone leave this meeting and then join the other Zoom meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.